Welcome back. In today's California housing market update, I'm going to share an update regarding home prices, housing inventory, price reductions, and much more, which more or less is all pointing to a slowing housing market here in California, like we're seeing across the country. I'm going to share how all these trends compare to years prior, especially compared to the Great Recession, and looking at pre-COVID levels. I make this video every single month for you guys. So if you guys get any value out of today's video, then please hit the like button. Also, consider subscribing as well. I also have a second YouTube channel as well, going over market updates and of course, what it's like to live in the greater Sacramento area, because of course I'm a realtor here in Sacramento. But today's video is only looking at the state as a whole and how the stats we're seeing today is really pointing to a softening housing market, moving in favor of home buyers, as I'll describe in today's video. So thank you for joining me. So this report is from the data is from the California Association of Realtors. I'm going to provide a lot of other analysis looking at how the trends we're seeing today, especially regarding home prices and inventory compared to years past. So let's begin. This is only looking at single family houses, by the way, excluding brand new home construction. And the most recent trends we have from them, they actually just announced this yesterday, is for June this year. So sales are down by 0.3% year over year. This is noteworthy given the fact that inventory is up greatly from a year ago, but despite more options for buyers, sales are still down compared to June of 2024. Meanwhile, the median sale price is at $899,000, so just less than $900,000. That is a decrease of 0.1% from 12 months prior to this. As a note right here, this is actually an improvement from May's numbers reported 1 month ago, because back then we saw a decrease down by 0.9%. Now this month it's down by 0.1% year over year. Again, stay tuned here in just a little bit. I'm going to share how these trends compare to years past, going all the way back until the Great Recession and looking at pre-COVID levels. Same goes for the inventory index. This is the month supply at 3.8 months. That is increased up by nearly 27% year over year. However, even though the month supply is up greatly from 1 year ago, this is also an improvement from May's numbers, because back in May compared to May 24, it was up by 46%. Now this month it's up by 27%. Let's also have a look at days in the market. This is a time frame when you list your home for sale until you accept an offer from a home buyer, and it becomes a closed home sale about 1 month later. So it's taken about 24 days to accept an offer. That's up by 33.3%. Also, this is higher than the 21 days we saw in the previous month back in May this year. So homes are taking a little bit longer to sell compared to May, for example. Now, I'm not going to go over the regions and counties in today's video. That is video number 2 coming here later this week. But I'm only going to go over in detail what's happening at the statewide level. So let's first talk about sales, and then we'll talk about home prices and much more, and also price reductions on top of that. So it says here sales bounced back in June, but remained below last year's levels. So sales rose by 4% compared to May, which is noteworthy. But having said that, we're still down by 0.3% from 12 months prior. On top of that, I mean, really, we're going to the third year in which sales are at very low levels. As you can see right here, 23, 24, and this year, really low levels, especially compared to pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, we should be seeing around, 400 to 450,000 sales each month, which is seasonally adjusted and annualized, and now it's only 264,000. So sales are very low levels, more in line with what we saw back in 2007 and 2008, which has been a common trend for about 2.5 years now. Now remember this, because sales are remaining at very low levels, but inventory is up greatly. So I want to share some data regarding that, because new listings have actually lost momentum. We're not seeing people listing home for sale like crazy. It's actually going down right now in June. Now here's something also interesting as well. Looking at the price tiers, every single price tier except for $500 to about $1 million, we're seeing an increase in sales year over year. And the most is actually in the more affordable range of less than $500,000. Having said that though, 37% of all closed home sales in June came from a home sale for over $1 million, which is pretty remarkable given the fact that it was basically reverse looking at pre-COVID levels. So back in, let's just say the spring home buying season of 2019, that ratio was less than 20%. And the ratio of houses that sold for less than $500,000 back then was around 45%. Now, if we fast forward to right now, 37%, less than 40%, are sales for over $1 million. And in contrast, for sales for less than $500,000 was only at 23%. So this means we have more home sales for over $1 million than we do for houses that sold for less than $500,000 in the state. As you guys all know, I'm a realtor here in Sacramento. Before COVID, it was pretty astonishing to see a home in Sacramento selling for over $1 million. Now it's kind of like normal for more desirable areas for larger houses. So, the market has changed drastically, especially looking at the gain in prices compared to 2019. It's up by nearly 50%. So I'll share some more data regarding that here in a little bit. All right, let's also have a look at a future indication of closed home sales. That is a pending home sale. A pending home sale is when a home seller accepts an offer from home buyer. It's an escrow. They're in the process of getting their inspections done, getting the final approval on their loan. It should become a closed home sale in about 30 days. So in California, it takes about 30 days to sell a home. You get your offer accepted, approximately 30 days later, you should get your keys to your house as long as you don't back out, right? So this is pretty noteworthy given the fact that pending home sales decreased by 6.4% from June of 2024, which implies that closed home sales in July should remain at very low levels. In fact, that was the biggest decline since January of 2025 regarding pendings. All right, let's change gears here and talk about prices. I have so much to share. I've been making this video for years now, and I share my own analysis looking at the changes in prices, which I just love doing this anyways. It's just a nerd in me. I used to be a CPA, right? All right, so looking at California's median home sold price, this means out of all the houses that did sell in June, half sold above this amount and half sold below this amount. That's the median number. It's just under $900,000. A decrease down by 0.1% from last month and down by 0.1% from 12 months ago. So let's have a look at this, because here is June 25. We're at 899,560. Again, like I mentioned, down by 0.1% from last month and 1 year ago. Now, something to keep in mind here, I tend to make this comment every several months because anything that has to do with a closed home sale, this is the median sold price, days in the market, a closed home sale. This is based on what the market was approximately 30 days before that. So looking at June closed home sales or home prices, that's really what the market was like back in May this year. And of course, that was when the home buyer got their offer accepted. Therefore, the median sold price in June is an indication of what the market was like 1 month ago. And what happened in May? Back in May, average mortgage rates increased to more or less a 3-month high, looking at data from Freddie Mac. Therefore, elevated rates and prices, which of course is causing housing affordability to become a big issue, has been for a while actually, along with rising inventory levels, is why the market here in California and nationwide is actually softening. All right, so looking at the median sold price at $899,000, it appears we have had an early peak of prices this year. We do have some seasonality in prices where, of course, prices are lower in the winter months and they're higher during the heart of the spring home buying season. This year, prices peaked at $910,000 back in April this year and have been coming down slightly ever since then. And again, I believe this all has to do with the rise of inventory levels and of course, housing affordability constraints as well. All right, so comparing prices compared to 12 months ago, we're still down year over year, but not as bad as what we saw back in May, because back in May, we were down by 0.9%. Like I mentioned last month, it's very unusual to see prices down compared to 12 months ago. In fact, over the last 13 years, or 160 months to be exact, there were only in the red or negative for 10 of those months. So there was only 10 at the last 160 months in which prices were down year over year. Also, the 0.1% decrease is much worse, though, than the average 8.7% gain we should be seeing since 2010. That's this right here. Based on my nerdy formula, the average June year-over-year change going back to 2010 is an increase of 8.7%. So pretty crazy that we're down year over year, but on top of that, it is much less than what we should be seeing during this time of year. However, though, this is my take regarding this trend here. Who really cares if prices are down by 0.1% from 12 months ago, given the fact that we're only about $11,000 shy of the all-time record high that was set back in April this year at $910,000. Now we're at more or less $900,000. So to you guys answer this. Is this a big deal to you that prices are down by 0.1% and we're only down by $10,000 from the all-time record highs? For all the home buyers out there, please leave me a comment below. Do you guys think this is a big deal or a nothing burger? On top of that, looking at the gain in prices compared to 2019, we're up by nearly 50%. So in my personal opinion, this decreased down by less than 1%. Therefore, in my personal opinion, this decline is basically a nothing burger, given the fact we've been seeing a sharp rise in prices over the past several years. All right, let's also have a look at the month-to-month change. The changes compared to May this year, it's also down by 0.1%, which is also an improvement compared to back in May. Back in May compared to April, we were down by 1.1%. Now we're only down by 0.1%. Now, having said that, this also is worse though, slightly worse compared to the 0.2% gain we should be seeing during this time of year. That's the average change from May through June going back to 2010 is an increase up by 0.2%. This year it's down by 0.1%. Now here are a couple of things I added in today's video. I just want to share how the changes we're seeing this year compared to the Great Recession. So June 07 through June 08, they were down a staggering 36.9%. This year, basically flat year over year. And also on top of that, like I mentioned, prices have surged over the past 6 years, up by 47% to be exact. All right, going back to the California Association of Realtors slideshow here, looking at the average sale price to final list price ratio, that's at 99.3%. This means on average, out of all the homes that did close escrow in June, they sold for 0.7% less than the seller's asking price. So therefore, even though we're seeing the kind of softening of the housing market, houses are still selling very close to seller's asking price on average. Let's also take a look at the percentage of homes that did sell over the seller's asking price. That was at 35.3%. So basically 1/3 are selling over the asking price and 2/3 are selling at the asking price or below the seller's asking price, which of course is good news for home buyers, right? On top of that, that's lower than last year, and of course, way lower than the peak when the market was in full steam at 73%. So back then, only 25% of the homes that sold that month sold for less than the asking price or the asking price. As I mentioned right here, though, at 35.3%, even though it's lower compared to last year, and of course, 2022, it's more or less in the range of pre-COVID levels. Looking at June 17, 18, and 19, the range was around 30 to about 40%, and here we are at around 35%. So therefore, the California market is obviously slowing down compared to the craziness we had back in 2020 through early, that should say 2022, but it is normalizing. All right, let's talk about inventory. I have a lot to share regarding inventory because prices really has a direct impact regarding what's happening regarding supply, right? It's all about the balance between demand and supply for any asset class. That's basically economics 101. So it says here that the month supply is at 3.8 months. 1 year ago, it was at 3 months. But at 3.8 months, that is flat compared to May. It was also at 3.8 months. So the market is definitely slowing down compared to a year ago, but it is more or less flat from last month. On top of that, look at during the Great Recession, 07, 08, it was over a 16-month supply. Now it's only 3.8 months. So therefore, like I mentioned right here, the housing supply we're seeing today pales in comparison during the Great Recession. And that is why, my friends, we're not going to see a sharp correction like we saw in 08 or 07, given the fact that inventory is at very, very low levels compared to the Great Recession. Now, don't take my word for it. Here is a data poll I pulled from the California Association of Realtors because of course I am a member of CAR. Every realtor here in California does have to be a member of NAR, as well as the California Association of Realtors. Anyways, looking at the 3.8 months, like I mentioned, the supply is an indication of how much leverage buyers or sellers have against each other, right? So in general, sellers have an advantage over buyers when the month supply is less than a 4-month supply. In contrast, buyers have an advantage over home sellers when it reaches 6 months or higher. Therefore, I would call this market at 3.8 months a weak seller's market. Now here's something that's really important though. At 3.8 months, that's the highest for the month of June, going all the way back until June of 2011. Something to keep in mind here as well, the month supply, same goes for sales, inventory, all has seasonality. And because of that, we should be comparing this June compared to previous years for the same month, right? Comparing June compared to January, for example, is comparing night and day difference, right? June, you have a lot of home sales, a lot of people buying houses. And of course, in December and January, inventory tends to, or I should say the month supply tends to be at a higher level compared to today. Also, having said that, it's actually more normal to see the month supply in the low 3s, and now we're at 3.8 months. So we're at elevated levels slightly. So for example, back in June of 2019, the month supply was at 3.4 months. It's slightly higher right now. On top of that, the average June, going all the way back until 2010, is a 3.2 months. Obviously a little bit lower compared to what we're seeing today at 3.8 months. But again, it pales in comparison where the peak was at 16.6 months back in January 2008, but much lower compared to the all-time record lows that was set back in December of 21. So just taking a step back here, looking at these numbers here, obviously the market is definitely softening and moving in the direction of home buyers, but it's not nearly as, how should I say, good for buyers today compared to 2008. Back then, of course, we had a glut of supply. There were so many houses for sale. As you can see here, a 16.6 month supply. Now it pales in comparison to what we're seeing today. So we should not be seeing a correction like we saw in 07, 08, given the fact that supply is at very low levels, historically speaking, looking at the Great Recession. All right, going back to this slideshow here, it says active listings increased to the highest level since October of 2019. So we have the month supply, which is an indication of the leverage between buyers and sellers, right? A higher than 6 month supply means that buyers have an advantage over sellers. Now looking at active listings, which is housing inventory, the total number of homes for sale in California as of the end of June increased the highest level since October of 2019. I added a note here because I would love to see the association compare June's numbers compared to previous years for the same month because of seasonality. Like I mentioned here, active listings has seasonality. It normally peaks in late summer and early fall months and bottoms out around January each and every year. So it would be better if they showed June's inventory figures compared to previous years for the same month. Therefore, just eyeballing this, it appears that inventory has increased to the highest levels since June of 2019. Here's another way to look at this. So inventory rose by 42.5% compared to June of 2024. We've been seeing a sharp increase of inventory really ever since the early parts of 2024. Now keep in mind though, even though inventory increased greatly last year, prices were still higher at the end of 24 compared to 2023. But having said that, the areas in which inventory was rising the most are areas in which prices eventually came down, like we're seeing today, and also with what we saw back in late 22 and early 23, where prices also decreased quite a bit as well. And back then, inventory was absolutely skyrocketing then. We're also seeing the growth rate of inventory at high levels right now, which is also causing inventory to decrease. In contrast, which is also causing inventory to increase as well. In contrast, when inventory was basically being depleted In 2020 through 21, of course, home prices absolutely skyrocketed. Now, here's something really important that you guys should be absolutely aware of. I hope you guys are still watching today's video. If you are, then please hit the like button. The reason why I mentioned this is because the growth rate of inventory is not due to the fact that everyone is listing the homes for sale. When looking at data from the state as a whole, new listings actually decreased by 5% from 12 months ago. On top of that, we had just over 20,000 new listings besides June of 2023. This is the lowest levels for any other June going all the way back until at least, keywords there at least, June of 2018. I mean, back then we had about 9,000 more new listings that year compared to this year. So here's my biggest takeaway as a note right here. Rising housing supply is mainly from a low level of sales, not a huge increase in people listing their houses for sale. Number two, could you imagine a scenario or a market in which new listings were absolutely skyrocketing? Again, this year it's down by 5, but could you imagine if new listings rose by 90% or 100%? That would cause inventory to increase greatly, which would cause home prices to fall greatly as well. So this is kind of the saving grace of a market in California, given the fact we're seeing a lot of home sellers delisting. In other words, they list their home for sale, they don't get an offer, so they just decide to wait it out and keep their houses. We're seeing that, but also we're seeing that a lot of people are just deciding not to sell, given the fact that new listings are at very low levels compared to the past several years. Let's also discuss the share of price reductions as well. A really good resource for that, showing like more timely updates here is altosresearch.com. The share of price reductions nationwide, this is the average for the nation, is at 41%. So about 4 of every 10 houses for sale have reduced their asking prices. This is higher than any other time frame during the same time since at least 2020. So it's at elevated levels right now, but it's not experiencing the sharp increase like we saw in 2022, like I've shared on this channel many times. In California though, the share is at more or less 37%, right in line with what we saw back in 2022 when the share was just over 35%. Even though the share is more or less in line with what we saw in 2022, it is night and day difference though. Look at the trough was around 12%, and by the time we hit mid-July, it increased to about 35%. This year, the trough was at 26%. Now it's at 36%. So the share of price reductions hasn't really increased very much. We're basically kind of seeing what we should be seeing each and every year because the share of price drops tends to increase during this time of year. But we're not seeing this sharp correction like we saw in 2022, which caused home prices to fall greatly in the last half of 22 and early 2023. With that said, if you guys want a real estate agent referral, then check out my website, which is realestateteamfinder.com. Also, if you guys got any value out of today's video, then please hit the like button. Also, consider subscribing as well. Hope you guys have an amazing day. I appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next video.